Hello, everyone. My name is Andrew Henderson. I'm the senior audience producer with the Lexington Herald Leader. I'm joined today by my friends and colleagues, Cam Drummond, a sports reporter here at the Herald Leader, and Monica Cast, who is our higher education reporter, except when the Kentucky Derby rolls around, in which case she is one of our preeminent Derby red carpet reporters. So we are here today to talk a little bit about a little horse race that you may or may not know about, the Kentucky Derby, coming up on its 151st year at Churchill Downs in Louisville. This coming Saturday, first Saturday in May, as it has been, except for two other times in its very long and storied history. So before I toss it over to Cam here to talk about sort of the big ticket items, which is, of course, what the post positions are looking like, what the odds are in the field at the moment, I wanted to take a little bit of time up top to talk very briefly about some renovations at Churchill Downs this year for people who are going, and also some renovations that are been put on pause a little bit. Some recent news that we've gotten within just this past week about projects at Churchill Downs. So this year, we will see a completed new feature at Churchill called the Grandstand Pavilion. They're billing it as a sort of upscale social environment on a second floor area. That is going to be what is described as a covered outdoor garden environment with new concession bar and bedding windows. Also some upgrades this year for a new starting gate courtyard and a pavilion near the top of the stretch where the Derby begins. Also a little bit of a seating change in that area with former bleacher seating converted to some nice cushioned stadium-style seats, which I always love. I hate sitting on a bleacher. So that's nice. That's a big to-do. And then, of course, perhaps the biggest news item is that in February of this year, Churchill Downs announced plans for a $1 billion expansion. Very large, its largest ever, that was supposed to begin later this year and go through 2028. Now, most of these things here were never planned to be ready for this year's Derby for the 151st running, but at the earliest would have been ready for the 152nd running in 2026. So some of those projects were going to revamp the Sky Terrace to create. There's going to be the creation of permanent seating in the infield and add a couple of infield structures for general admission as well. Now those projects have been put on pause and are delayed, with Churchill officials saying the reason for that being overall economic uncertainty, some of which has come about due to tariffs put forth or proposed by President Donald Trump. There are a couple of projects that are continuing this year. Renovations of the Finish Line Suites and the Mansion, which are for some of the more, I suppose we would say, highfalutin people who come to the Derby, of which none of us are. But for the people who pay top dollar for some of those really higher tier tickets, those are some of the renovations that are going to be finishing up and aren't going to be affected by that. So we'll turn our attention now to the race at large. Cam, tell us about how the field is looking. What can we learn from the post positions? Who's the favorite? Who's the long shot? What can you tell us?
Yeah, I was about to say, you said that we're not any of the highfalutin people who are going to be going to the Kentucky Derby, but I don't have all these pages of notes written down to not win any money coming up on Saturday night. Although my past performance handicapping the Derby probably suggests otherwise. But yeah, as you alluded to, the post position draw for the Derby took place last Saturday night at Churchill Downs. We have a ton of content already up at Kentucky.com and Kentucky.com/sports, breaking down several of the horses in the field, the post position draw itself, some of the major storylines. So just right off the top, I'd like to direct everyone there. I'll be giving an overview of some of the more interesting storylines, horses, trainers, jockeys, names to know in the field, but all the nitty gritty stuff can be found over there at Kentucky.com. So let's start with the favorite. The favorite is Journalism out of post position number 8. Was assigned morning line odds of 3-1. There he is right there on your screen. Trained by Michael McCarthy, going to be ridden by Umberto Rispoli. And a really interesting horse, especially in this year's Derby, because this isn't really a dominant crop of 3-year-old thoroughbreds. There are some very good horses in this field, to be sure. But that being said, there's not one overwhelming, overpowering favorite. That being said, Journalism is the horse that has been assigned morning line favorite responsibilities at 3-1. He's won 4 of his 5 career races. He's on a 4-race winning streak right now. He has never left California for a race, though. He's done all of his damage at Santa Anita, at Del Mar, at Los Alamitos. His big victory on the Kentucky Derby prep trail came in the Santa Anita Derby, which is considered one of, if not the best prep races. But it only came against a 5-horse field. So going from that to the 20-horse starting gate that'll be used in the Kentucky Derby, we've got a full field of 20 horses this year, including one also eligible horse that's kind of waiting in the wings to potentially move into the field if something happens to one of the contenders as Derby week moves on. But yeah, Journalism, his trainer and jockey combo also isn't super proven at this stage. Michael McCarthy is relatively young in the training game. I believe he's 54 years old, but he's only saddled one Derby horse before. That was Endlessly last year, who ran 9th. Umberto Rispoli, his jockey, has only ran or contended or ridden on 2 Derby horses before, hasn't won either time. So Journalism definitely has some strong characteristics of a Derby horse. Again, winning the Santa Anita Derby, despite it only being a 5-horse field, it is a notable accomplishment. But there's still a lot of questions to be asked of him. And despite being the favorite, I think there's a lot of other horses in this field who have an opportunity to pick him off. I know we'll be talking about Bob Baffert a little bit later on, but you can't talk about the Derby and you can't talk about Bob Baffert in the Derby without touching on a couple of his horses. He's got 2 in the field this year, Citizen Bull, who'll leave the 1 post, Rodriguez, who will leave the 4 post. The 1 post is usually kind of seen as a bit of a kiss of death in the Derby, and Citizen Bull has kind of disappointed a bit this year. He was a 2-year-old champion last year, so had way high expectations going into his 3-year-old season, but it's kind of disappointed. Didn't run super well in some of his more recent races. Rodriguez definitely comes in as the stronger of the 2 Baffert horses, which is a kind of crazy thing to say if you go back a year when Citizen Bull was the 2-year-old champion, when Barnes, who a lot of people thought might be Baffert's best Derby horse, didn't even end up qualifying for the field. But Rodriguez will enter after winning the Wood Memorial at Aqueduct in New York City. And the thing to remember, and again, we'll touch on this a little bit later with Baffert as well, is he's just so darn good at Churchill Downs. Obviously went away for 3 years following the Medina Spirit disqualification in 2021, but he's tied for the most wins of any trainer in the Kentucky Derby with 6, tied with Ben Jones in that regard. Rodriguez in particular has Mike Smith aboard, who's a really talented, experienced jockey who's won 2 Kentucky Derbies in the past. So always, important to monitor the Baffert horses and kind of know what you're getting into when you're going against Bob Baffert or choosing to wager against him at Churchill Downs. To talk about some of the longer shots on the board, if we could pull up the photo, we have a Final Gambit for a second. This horse is absolutely fascinating to me. He's one of only 3 gray horses in the field. He's the winner of the Jeff Ruby Stakes up at Turfway Park in Florence in northern Kentucky. He's actually never left Kentucky in any of his races. He's the only horse in the 20-horse field to never leave the Commonwealth. Trained by Brad Cox, who's a Louisville native, who has a Derby on his register, but that was Mandaloun. That was 2021. That kind of has the asterisk next to it. Same goes for his ownership group. He's a homebred from Juddmonte Farms here in Lexington. Again, the last time that they had a Derby horse was that winner with Mandaloun in 2021. But nonetheless, they didn't get the true celebratory nature of winning the Derby, right? They didn't get to drape Mandaloun in the garland of roses. They didn't get to accept the trophy on the stage in front of everyone. So he's a really interesting horse. He's going to be ridden by Luan Machado, a Brazilian jockey who'll be making his Kentucky Derby debut this year. But Luan Machado is the winningest rider in Kentucky currently. I believe he rode something like 150, 152 winners last year on the Kentucky circuit. So he's very familiar winning everywhere in Kentucky, Churchill Downs, Turfway Park, Keeneland, all these places. So he's kind of an up and coming jockey. And so I think that, along with the storyline of being a gray horse, a gray hasn't won since 2005 with Giacomo. Everyone loves betting on a gray horse, or loves, I guess, betting against a gray horse sometimes. So he's kind of got some interesting narratives and storylines. Another horse that I think it's important to touch on is Sandman, who's 6-1 on the morning line right now. He's one of the other two gray horses in the field, and he was expected to be one of the Derby favorites. He still is at 6-1, the third choice on the morning line, trained by Mark Casse to be ridden by Jose Ortiz. The problem with Sandman is that in Saturday night's post position draw, he was drawn into post position number 17. That's the only post position in the Kentucky Derby that's never produced a winner. Every other post position that's currently used in the starting gate, 1 through 20, except post position 17, has delivered a Derby winner at some point. So obviously you kind of have that negative connotation going with Sandman into this year's Derby. That being said, he's a very talented horse, sired by Tappet, and everyone knows how good not only of a racehorse Tappet was, but what some of his sons have produced, some of his daughters as well, just in racing circuits. He won the Arkansas Derby, Sandman did, and that's considered one of the top Kentucky Derby preps. And there's also a bit of a monkey that Mark Casse needs to get off his back with the Derby as well. He's 0 for 10 with runners in the Derby. Very accomplished career in the Canadian Racing Hall of Fame, has really set up shop at Woodbine for the last 20, 30 years and just picked off win after win. So he's someone who I think is really looking to add a Kentucky Derby trophy to his trophy case, to his resume as well. The same can obviously be said of Steve Asmussen, the all-time winningest trainer in North America, who once again, I know we bring this up every year that he has a horse in the field, is 0 for 26 in the Derby. He's got two runners this year with Publisher and Tiztastic, who will actually leave right next to each other in post positions 13 and 14. And another kind of narrative that I want to close on as well is just the diversity that we're seeing in this field from a training perspective. I mentioned that Steve Asmussen has two runners in the Derby field this year. He and Bob Baffert are the only trainers that have multiple horses in the field. So you have 18 different trainers, only two trainers with two horses. We're kind of coming out of this super trainer era, or at least we've been stuck in it for a little bit, where we've had Todd Pletcher have 4 horses in the Derby, Bob Baffert have 4 horses in the Derby. Just not a whole lot of diversity in that way, but there's so many good trainers out there in the country, so many that are finally getting recognized by having a horse on the Derby trail, having a horse in the starting gate for the Derby this year, and a ton of sentimental storylines as well. The horse coming out of the 16 gate, Cole Battle, is going to be the sentimental choice for everybody who tunes into NBC's broadcast or shows up to the track on Saturday. He's trained by this 72-year-old guy named Lonnie Briley, longtime Louisiana trainer, talks like a longtime Louisiana trainer as well. Never had a horse in a graded stakes, let alone winning a graded stakes, let alone getting on the Derby trail. And that's exactly what Cole Battle has done. He's won 5 races from 8 starts. A super versatile horse. The fact that he made, in Briley's case, his graded stakes debut as a trainer just a few months ago, and I believe the Rebel Stakes, and now he's going to be saddling a horse in the Kentucky Derby, is a tremendous story. Chunk of Gold coming out of post position 19, another long shot. He's trained by 32-year-old Ethan West, who I believe is based up in northern Kentucky. He's the third and final gray or roan horse in the field. He was second in the Louisiana Derby. The fact that you have a 32-year-old from Kentucky who's got a horse in the Derby, and the fact that a lot of these horses like Cole Battle, like Chunk of Gold, weren't really supposed to materialize into Derby horses either. You always hear about these horses that are going for millions of dollars at the Keeneland yearling sale, or just, really prominent sales, owners, doling out so much cash for them. There's still, some diamonds in the rough out there. You can get a horse for $50,000, for $70,000, relatively cheap in horse racing circles, and they can kind of take you on the ride of a lifetime, like we've seen a couple of those guys do. And then a final storyline that I think, just from a local central Kentucky perspective, we should keep an eye on is the Bluegrass Stakes, because it's been since 1991 that the Bluegrass Stakes has produced a Kentucky Derby winner that was Strike the Gold. So we're going on more than 30 years now since a runner in the Bluegrass Stakes, the signature race during the spring meet at Keeneland, since any runner from that race, let alone winner of the Bluegrass, has translated that form to the Kentucky Derby. And this may be the year where we finally break through in that regard, because there's going to be 4 horses in the Derby field projected right now, as of Tuesday afternoon that ran in the Bluegrass, who will compete for the Kentucky Derby on Saturday. That's going to be the winner of the Bluegrass, Burnham Square. That's going to be the runner-up in the Bluegrass, East Avenue. And that's also going to be a couple horses that really disappointed in the Bluegrass. Render Judgment, who ran 5th, and also Owen Almighty, who ran 6th, and will leave from the final post position number 20 in the Derby. So Render Judgment and Owen Almighty probably shouldn't get too much of the attention and certainly won't get too much of the betting handle come Saturday at Churchill Downs. But Burnham Square was really impressive. He just pipped East Avenue by a nose in what was a really thrilling edition of the Bluegrass. And those two horses, Burnham Square, who's conditioned by Ian Wilkes, East Avenue, who's conditioned by Brendan Walsh. I think those are two horses to really look at in the Derby, and they give the Bluegrass a really good chance of finally producing a Derby winner for the first time in 32, 33 years.
Cam, you are a repository of knowledge on this, and I know that people more tuned in than I almost definitely appreciate your insight here. My head is swimming. I don't know how you do it. I do want to ask one thing before I toss it over to Monica to talk a little bit more about, the Derby is also an event where we see our fair share of celebrities and, people from the arts and entertainment world and things like that. Cam, something you touched on that I thought was interesting there is, and I'm hoping you can elaborate a little bit more, share a little bit more insight here, is like, are we beginning to see an era of horse racing here, not just, in the Derby, but maybe in the industry of like, it seems like ownership is becoming a little bit more, I don't know if democratized is the right word, but it seems like we're getting some more ownership of these horses that's being split a little bit more than it has been in the past, where it seems like it's been sort of like thoroughly consolidated with like one farm or one stable even or something like that. Does it look like it's getting to be a little bit more like, seems like a lot of people are, having some ownership of racehorses now. I mean, Travis Kelce of the Kansas City Chiefs, has ownership in one. I think Swift Delivery, of course, a nod to Taylor Swift, as Monica confirms there. So what is the feel there? Are we beginning to enter into an age of this of horse racing where we're seeing more and more people take a little bit more part of that pie?
Yeah, it's interesting. There's definitely more avenues to owning a racehorse or becoming part of a horse racing ownership group now than there was 10, 15 years ago. And obviously there's pros and cons with that. Above ground stuff, kind of below ground stuff. My Racehorse might be a consortium, kind of an organization that people have heard of before. I think they've had one or two horses in derbies and in Triple Crown races where you can kind of buy a little bit of a share of a horse, and it ends up being, a bunch of, 1,000 people, 2,000 people have this small percent of the pie. So in that sense, yeah, there's a little bit more of an egalitarian aspect. That being said, there are still some real prominent owners that we were seeing time and time again. Godolphin is obviously probably the name brand one in that regard. They just wrapped up a really strong spring meet at Keeneland as well. And even some of the legacy ones, Calumet Farms just won the spring meet from an owner's title perspective. I think they had 5 winners this past April at Keeneland. I mentioned Juddmonte, who obviously hasn't had a horse in the Derby since 2021. They're back this year with Final Gambit, but that's a real kind of legacy organization, classic owner from that regard. Mike Rapoli is back with another horse in the Derby again this year. For anyone who's got the crossover college basketball horse racing appeal, which I reckon is a lot of people in the Bluegrass. They are very familiar with Mike Rapoli, not only kind of bankrolling Rick Pitino's team over at St. John's, but also his continued efforts to try and get a Derby winner. So he's back again this year. And a lot of things, from an ownership perspective, they kind of go in concert with some of the connections as well, especially with some of the trainers. And one of the stories I've already got published up at Kentucky.com this week kind of centers around Bob Baffert's return, and not just speaking to him, but speaking to some of the other trainers about what they think about Baffert coming back to the Derby. And something that was interesting in that regard is that I was talking to Michael McCarthy, the trainer of the Morning Line Favorite Journalism, who shares his base at Santa Anita Park in California with Baffert. And something that he mentioned kind of in response to a question about why some of the field sizes are smaller in California, why there may only be 5 or 6 horses running in such a prestigious race like the Santa Anita Derby, is the fact that people really trust Bob Baffert with their horses from an ownership perspective. They have a talented 2-year-old, 3-year-old. They're going to entrust that with Baffert. Nobody else can really infringe on that market share. So a lot of that kind of comes down to that relationship thing as well, right? If an owner develops a good relationship with a trainer, if that owner has deep pockets, if they're willing to invest time and time again in quality racehorses at sales, you know, there's only going to be so many trainers that kind of gets funneled to. And obviously from an ownership perspective, there's only so many people that can continue to pump that money into it. So it kind of goes as a two-way street. But to your point as well, I do think we're seeing some new owners, definitely a little bit more democratized in terms of, hey, you don't necessarily need $10 gajillion to be training a Derby horse or to be involved in the ownership group. And then the other thing with that is that it just kind of all comes down to luck. Right. You know, I mentioned Barnes a while ago, who a lot of people thought was going to be Bob Baffert's best 3-year-old this year. He was offered it in several different rounds of future Kentucky Derby wager betting as a horse that people were jumping on, trying to get on the ground floor. And he's not in the 20-horse field, and he didn't really come particularly close to making it. So at the end of the day, you know, maybe some of these ownership stuff is just a reflection of the way that you qualify for the Kentucky Derby, which is a qualifying race series. They run a bunch of smaller races with certain smaller point values throughout the fall and the early part of the spring, the winter. And then the big money races, the big points races come out in March and April. And if you happen to be owning a horse that puts in a strong effort and finishes second or third in one of these 100-point qualifiers, you'll probably make the Derby gate. You know, all you need to do is accrue 45, 48 qualifying points. And yeah, so some of it's the luck of the draw, and some of it maybe is just a little bit more democratization on the ownership front.
Yes, always luck, always a very big component in the Kentucky Derby. I think that's what always makes it such an interesting sport to watch, because we'll have horses with the best odds in the world that may have a bad day, and there could be anything that goes wrong. And then you're out a couple of $100 million. Not me personally. I don't have that kind of money. But some people who come to the Derby do, like some of our celebrity fans. So we're gonna use that as a segue over to Monica here. Now, Monica, you and I have been stationed on the Derby red carpet for, I think this will be our 4th year, I believe, going back. I don't know that a lot of people necessarily know that there is. It's a little bit kept away from most of where people are at Churchill Downs on Derby Day, but there is a red carpet at the Kentucky Derby. It's not like it's not the same vibe as, like, what's that one? Is it the Met? Is that
the Met Gala?
Yeah, it's not the Met Gala necessarily. It's not that. Although there is a good array and variety of fashion. But yeah, Monica, tell us a little bit about who we may expect to see there on the red carpet, but also a little bit about we've got a pretty prominent athlete delivering the Riders Up call this year, as well as some musical performers who are going to be I believe singing the national anthem.
Yeah, so every year for Derby, there's a bunch of celebrities who come in. These can be, musicians, athletes. A lot of people from the Food Network love to come and hang out and take part in the events leading up to Derby and things like that. But I think I am probably most excited for Simone Biles. She is going to be making the Riders Up call before the Derby. So before the horses get in the gate, she will be the one who tells the riders to get on the horses and head out to the gate.
And they don't know to do that until someone tells them.
Someone has to tell them, but I'm hoping that she walks the red carpet. She's the most decorated gymnast in history. And so I think it would be really cool to see her. And then we also have the national anthem. So Grace Potter will be singing that this year. She's a Grammy nominated artist. And so she will be leading that off before the big race. But, you never really know who's going to show up on the red carpet. There's a couple.
There's a
couple that we do know. Okay, I will give you
always count on. Governor Andy Bashir is definitely one of them. Him and
Yes.
his wife, First Lady Brittany Bashir. Almost a certainty to see them, as well as Louisville Mayor Craig Greenberg. Not surprising to see him there, as the race is being held in Louisville. And then, of course, Monica's BFF, Mr. Jack Harlow.
Jack Harlow is the king of the red carpet at the Derby. Like, I am not exaggerating when I say I have never heard people scream louder and like get more excited to see somebody than Louisville's own Jack Harlow.
Yes, he always draws quite the crowd. To give people a sort of a sense for some of the folks that usually show up. Winona Judd was there last year. I believe she did the national anthem last year for the 150th Derby. So she opted to walk the red carpet. Jimmy Fallon, who was kind of a surprise. I certainly didn't expect to see Jimmy Fallon there.
I didn't either. It was a fun surprise.
Yes, Jimmy Fallon was there. Travis Kelce.
That was the big surprise of last year's Derby. So there were rumors that Travis Kelce and maybe Taylor Swift were going to make an appearance, and then Travis Kelce did end up being there without Taylor, and apparently had a really good time, because he went on to talk about it on the podcast with his brother Jason about how much he loved it and how he's a big Derby guy. And then he and Jason joked that they were going to come back in 2025 and party in the infield. And while I don't think logistically they would be able to enter the infield without being like mobbed, I think we have a decent shot at seeing Travis and Jason there. And may I go into a conspiracy theory?
Yes, but before you do that, I should note, while Travis Kelce did come to the Derby last year, was not actually on the red carpet.
Right.
He showed up a little bit later. Which just to know, we did not actually get to see him there on the red carpet. Some of these people, some of these celebrities do show up to the Derby. They just don't. They just don't come by to talk to us specifically.
They don't want to be interviewed for the Herald Leader TikTok account.
No, insane. But yes, Monica, please proceed with your
All right. So I have a theory this year that if Taylor Swift is coming to the Derby, it's going to be this year. And it's because she has donated a signed guitar and 2 tickets to her next tour to be auctioned off at the Unbridled Eve Derby Gala, which I believe is Thursday night. And maybe, Travis came to the Derby. He had a great time. Andrew mentioned earlier he bought a share of a racehorse called Swift Delivery. And so maybe Travis Kelce is bringing the whole crew this year. Maybe everybody's coming. Taylor was on tour last year. The Eras Tour is over. So Taylor Swift, come on down.
I think the Eras Tour being over, I think, is the big ticket item. I thought that would continue in perpetuity.
No, that ended last year, Andrew.
Well, yes, it is quite the theory, and Monica and I we talk about this actually, and over on Kentucky.com, some of our picks and some of our picks for people we would like to see on the red carpet. With Taylor Swift definitely classified as a wild card, given the probability is low, I think, because as I note, I think it would be an even bigger logistical nightmare to get Taylor Swift to Churchill Downs. Just thinking back to when in 2022, when then at the time former President Donald Trump attended the Derby, it was it was quite the gaggle of Kentucky State Police and FBI agents who came with him. I think Taylor Swift may, in fact, warrant an authorization of the Kentucky National Guard and also an airlift in and out of Churchill Downs to get her there.
Listen, the chances may be low, but all I'm saying is the chances are not zero.
That is true. Some of the other people, to go through very quickly, some of the other people that Monica and I hope to see on the Derby red carpet. One person I hope to see, Jen Tulick, Louisville native, most recently in Severance, a hit TV show on Apple TV+. If you haven't seen Severance, I would highly recommend it. It's a great show. She plays the character Devon Scout, who is the sister of Mark Scout, who is the main character, played by Adam Scott. In this show, where the work is very mysterious and important, and just a great show. Would love to see her. Like I said, a Louisville native. So I think out of all the picks, that one at least has a little bit of merit to it. Monica and I both would like to see Mr. Josh Hutcherson of Hunger Games fame, who is enjoying a bit of a renaissance, according to Esquire magazine. The Hunger Games being back in the news, of course, with a new book that I believe Monica has finished already.
I have. I gave it 5 stars.
Gave it 5-star. What is Sunrise on the Reaping? Is that right?
Sunrise on the Reaping, yeah.
Yes. And then, of course, we've got Mr. Chris Stapleton, who I think we're always jonesing to see on the red carpet. I think we picked him to show up last year, and he still hasn't showed up.
He's not. But I did check his tour schedule this year, and he's got a bit of a break until the middle of May. So maybe.
Okay, so maybe that's sort of in conjunction with Mr. Tyler Childers, the two of them headlining a concert later this year in Ashland called Healing Appalachia. So maybe they show up as a pair. I don't know. All three of us were separately and yet interconnectedly at his concert at Kroger Field recently. So maybe that's a sign.
Yeah, the power of the Herald Leader brought us together outside. It was like section or gate 12 at Kroger Field while leaving the show. What a pleasant surprise it was to run into you, because me and Monica were there in the same group. But what a pleasant surprise was it to run into you on the way out of that show.
Yes, a pleasant sort of feather in the cap that was that show. And Monica, are there any other big name? George Clooney, we're thinking.
I'm going to go ahead and throw out, I'm a big fan of reality TV, and I feel like we always see a few, I don't want to say Bachelor Nation has-beens, but, maybe people who were on the show like 8 to 10 years ago. But I am going to go ahead and pull and root that Joey Graziadei and Kelsey Anderson make an appearance this year. So Joey was the Bachelor, I believe, 2 seasons ago. He and Kelsey got engaged on the show. And we've kind of seen them at a lot of big events. They've been at Coachella, Mardi Gras, Super Bowl. Not that the Derby red carpet is anywhere near the caliber of the Super Bowl, but,
That's right. It's bigger.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. But they seem to love going to events. They seem to love going to sporting events. And I could see them making an appearance at the Derby. Let me run through my list real quick. I think, one that we talked about too, I think is George Clooney, another Kentucky native who we've thrown out in years past as a guest, and we've never seen him, but he has been talking a lot about Kentucky recently. He's thrown his support behind Governor Andy Beshear for making a run for president and things like that. I think in the last year, he's kind of talked a lot about Kentucky and Beshear and things like that. So maybe he's got Kentucky on the mind and he wants to come on down to the fastest 2 minutes in sports.
Yeah, he's either got that on the mind or the hair dye is leaking into his brain. I don't know.
I did notice the hair dye. But,
we all noticed the hair dye.
Well, I wanted to ask you guys real quick, as the two. So I'm never on the Derby red carpet. I'm in the seat. I'm watching the action. I'm in the paddock. I'm trained in on the 20 horses for the Derby that goes off.
You're locked in. Yeah.
Yeah, like 7 p.m. And one of these days it's going to go off at 10 p.m. I'm convinced. But I'm not sure. Have you guys been doing it the last 3 years? Is that correct?
Yeah, this will be our 4th year.
Got it. So 2022, I can't imagine any of the celebrities guessed Rich Strike or picked him as their Derby horse. Maybe not with Mage in 2023 either. Mystic Dan perhaps was more realistic last year. Just off the top of your head, has any of these celebrities, when you've tossed the tiny mic for the Herald Leader TikTok in front of them, actually gotten it right? The only one I can remember is obviously Jack Harlow going with Happy Jack, because he didn't really have much of a choice given that horse's name. Has any of the celebrities actually nailed it any of the last couple years?
Yeah, Reed Shepherd did last year, former University of Kentucky men's basketball player. He came up and, I said, all right, who's your Derby pick? And he said, well, I just drew Mystic Dan out of the hat, so I guess that's who it is. And then, as we all maybe remember, Mystic Dan ended up winning. Yeah. But he's the only one off the top of my head I can remember actually getting it correct, and his was a draw out of a hat. So I don't know how much merit we want to give to celebrities' betting habits.
And
much like anything in the year 2024, it seemed to all come up Reed Shepherd.
Yeah. And then I don't recall if Governor Bashir, I can't recall if he actually names a horse or.
He has in the past. He normally picks a horse that is born and bred and trained in Kentucky. So he's got some options this year.
Yes, that is true. That is true. So yeah, we will have a lovely time on the red carpet, seeing who shows up. And
I was going to mention too, another good way to gauge who will be there is looking at the Barnstable Brown Derby Eve list. That's the huge event. It's a huge fundraiser that takes place on Friday night before the Derby. And so that list actually came out this morning, and it looks like the big names from that one, we've got Machine Gun Kelly, we've got Aaron Rodgers, Travis Tritt, Tracy Morgan. So some of those might make an appearance on Saturday if they get there in time.
Yeah.
Machine Gun Kelly's going to be at the Derby.
Yeah.
It's going to be at Barnstable at least, which is a pretty good
Barnstable is a pretty good indicator for Derby.
Yes. So I suppose we might have to prepare ourselves for Machine Gun Kelly.
Yeah. Oh, and another one we didn't mention, Shabuzi is headlining the FanDuel pre-Derby party sometime this week. So Shabuzi might be there.
Yes, Shabuzi is almost certainly a good bet as well. Usually when these folks show up for one of the pre-events, they're probably going to come because they're already here. First of all, so a good reason to go ahead and do that.
And that'll just be the first taste of Shabuzi for the Commonwealth, because he's one of the bigger acts that's playing at Railbird, I believe. Is that the first week of June here in Lexington?
I believe so. Yeah, May 31st and June 1st, I think.
That's true. Maybe Jelly Roll will show up. I don't know.
Lexington does love Jelly Roll, so I could see him. We've got a mural of Jelly Roll downtown. Nobody really knows why.
So I don't know. Maybe Jelly Roll will show up. Maybe Hosier will show up since he was at Railbird last year.
That would be fun.
That'd be something. So it is always a pleasure to see who shows up. As Monica said, there's always an assortment of reality TV star people, WWE stars. There was one year that I think it was like people with I think it was a BMW, Monica.
Usually there's a few people who either sponsor part of the Derby or who have, a share of a horse that walked the red carpet. So we've seen BMW, which Andrew, would you like to?
Yeah, I thought when they announced it, I thought they were announcing people from the DMV. And I thought, I was like, well, that's so quaint. I like that they're recognizing these civil servants. But that wasn't what happened.
No.
Was not what happened. We may also.
I will just add for my lone sports celebrity contribution to this discussion. I'm not as well versed in the pop culture, what's happening in the magazines as you kind folks are. But I will say that one of the horses in the Derby who's not expected to be a real factor in the race, Flying Mohawk, second in the Jeff Ruby Stakes in March at Turfway Park, was well behind Final Gambit, who won that race. But Flying Mohawk, part of his ownership group is Jason Worth, who's a former MLB All-Star outfielder with the Philadelphia Phillies. And he is almost always at this horse's races or is very connected into horse racing, that kind of thing. He was pretty well known as a player, big beard, long hair, kind of fitting with the name Flying Mohawk for his horse. So I'd be pretty expecting that he would show up on the red carpet and give you guys some thoughts as well.
Yeah.
I do think I interviewed a baseball player named Jason last year, but I can't remember what his last name was.
Well, if you recognize him, then you realize it's the same guy.
All right. Well, aside from the red carpet, I think, and Cam, you've touched on this as well, a sort of a celebrity, I think, in his own right, Mr. Bob Baffert, will be, they're saying he's Bob Backert at the Derby this year because he's coming back.
You did it. You pulled the trigger on it. Good job.
after a couple of years away, of course, he's trained 2 Triple Crown winners, an American Pharaoh and Justify, and his horses have won the Derby, I believe 6 times. Is that right, Cam?
Yeah, 6 times, 7 if you count the Medina Spirit disqualification from 2021. You can't really count that, but 7 times his horses have hit the line first in the Kentucky Derby.
Yeah, of course, in the Medina Spirit disqualification in 2021, of course, is what kept him away from Churchill for a couple of years. But Cam, I think whenever Bob Baffert comes to town, inevitably a lot of eyes are going to turn on what's going on with him, on what horse he has in the race. So what should we be on the lookout for from Bob this year?
Yeah, so I touched on him a little bit earlier, but myself and my wonderful colleague John Clay, we both have some materials up at Kentucky.com/sports that are really Baffert specific. What his return to the Kentucky Derby means for horse racing, for this event, what others in the industry, rival trainers, just people in the horse game are saying about it. And the thing that's really kind of struck me from my conversations and speaking with people is just how welcoming a lot of other people have been of Baffert's return, not just because they think that, he was in the right in the Churchill Downs dispute, or for a while there, he was able to compete at any track around the country that wasn't owned by Churchill Downs Incorporated. And so that, maybe felt like a bit of an unnecessary retaliatory penalty. It's clear that litigation and that kind of, the tension between Churchill Downs and Bob Baffert turned personal, leading to him being away from the Derby for 3 years. But when I was talking to Mark Cassie, who conditioned Sandman, again, one of the top choices for this year's Derby, something that he mentioned was that he wants to win the Derby, but he wants to beat the best while winning the Derby. And that was kind of a common refrain from a lot of trainers that I spoke to or have heard speak about Bob Baffert's return, is that they're happy that he's back because he's one of the top trainers in the game. His record has been pretty spotless since the Medina Spirit incident in 2021. And just the fact that that Bob Baffert, again, a 6-time Kentucky Derby winner, tied with Ben Jones for the most ever. He won the Preakness Stakes while he was still banned from the Kentucky Derby. So he's still plenty good at conditioning Triple Crown race winners. But these other trainers want to go out and beat the best. It's like, anything in our field, right? You want to go out and you want to write the best story you can from the Kentucky Derby. Andrew, in your case, you want to be the best senior audience producer that you can from the Kentucky Derby.
Cam, how did you know?
Wants to be the best celebrity interviewer on the Kentucky Derby red carpet. I know that for a fact after watching you in action. But just, all these trainers want to beat the best. Bob Baffert is considered the pinnacle of the sport. He's obviously such a name brand recognized guy, and kind of an interesting subplot to this as well. And it's really hard to compare derbies, year over year, just because of the different horses in the field, what the weather might be like, what else is happening on the first Saturday in May from a TV Nielsen viewership perspective. But Bob Baffert does draw eyeballs to the race. Bob Baffert will increase interest in this year's Kentucky Derby. Again, I kind of touched on his 2 horses earlier. Citizen Bull, who's disappointed since becoming the 2-year-old champion last year. Rodriguez, who's the better of the 2 horses, but still winning the Wood Memorial isn't exactly the toughest prep race to win. And there's still plenty of questions about him. He's only 12-1 on the morning line. But the fact that Bob Baffert has multiple runners in the Kentucky Derby, let alone the fact that Bob Baffert is back at all at Churchill Downs for the Kentucky Derby, is going to be a narrative that over the next 4 or 5 days gets absolutely run into the ground if it hasn't already. He's already had his first big media gaggle on the backstretch at Churchill. That took place, I believe, last Friday morning, where he held court with reporters for 20-25 minutes and got a lot of those early questions out of the way. Some of those questions came up again following Saturday night's post position draw. I believe Baffert spoke briefly Monday morning, after I think Citizen Bull worked at Churchill Downs. So this narrative isn't going away. And if you haven't read all of our coverage at Kentucky.com, A, I would recommend you do so. And B, the NBC broadcast, I'm sure, will dedicate bundles of time in the lead up to Saturday's Derby, talking about Baffert's return, hearing from different perspectives on it, and kind of rehashing what was a really drawn out 3-year legal saga. But that's all to say that Baffert's back. He's only 72. He still looks like he's in good condition. He still obviously got great horses in his barn. As I kind of mentioned earlier in the ownership discussion, top dollar owners implicitly trust him with their horses as well. So Baffert's back, and I don't think that'll change anytime soon until he chooses to retire. He should still be a staple of the Derby scene for at least several years going into the future. And I'm sure he desperately wants to get that 7th Derby win, which would make him the most accomplished trainer all time in the Derby.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That'd be a record breaker, which is a quick little segue into just a very brief thing that our other colleague, John Clay, wrote about last week, is as we approach this Derby, and in fact, the whole of the Triple Crown, 52 years later, we still see records unbroken that were set by Secretariat back in 1973, which is just an incredible, I think, testament to that horse and to a lot of people involved in the training and the upbringing of Secretariat. But just a little tidbit, little factoid out there for folks that even after over 50 years, records set by the famed Secretariat still stand to this day. Well, folks, I think we're going to come up on the end of our time here, but before we do, I'd like to go around, like to hear from people. Who are we placing bets on? Monica, I want to start with you. Actually, Monica, we'll go to you, and then me, and then we'll finish with the actual probably good advice, which is Cam's.
This will be bad advice from me. I'm almost certain, but
which I feel like I don't know if I have a legal need to say this, but I will say this as a legal disclaimer. We do not condone any of this as like, you need to bet on this horse, put your money on this horse. In fact, if you have if you need assistance with gambling or have a gambling addiction at all, there's a number. I believe it is 1-800-GAMBLER is the state gambling helpline. I say this in good jest, but of course, be conscious if this is something that you actually struggle with. But Monica, if you had to pick a horse to bet on for real or fictionally, who are you picking?
Well, with the caveat that people should not take any advice about sports from me, I would say I think I am probably going to end up betting on journalism for Saturday. You know, I think the odds are good. I think there's a lot of hype that's probably deserved. And as someone who has spent the last decade of my life in journalism, I think I owe it to bet on journalism a little bit. So
I think that is a great bet. Our friend and video producer, Marcus Dorsey, also does confirm the National Problem Gambling Helpline, 1-800-GAMBLER. So that is good information to have. I think, Monica, I am also I think journalism and Sandman have my eyes. I mean, it's just too good to have a horse named Journalism with such good odds and to be in this line of work. Of course, it's going to be too on the nose if it just comes in dead last, and it's like, well, I hope that's not a metaphor for anything. So journalism and Sandman definitely have my eyes. My father-in-law, who was asking me about this just the other day, for those interested in what he's looking at, he's got his eyes on Rodriguez and Grande. So I don't know the reasoning behind that. He just asked me out of the blue who I was thinking about, and so he told me that's who he was thinking about. All right, Cam, who should we actually be looking at? Who's gonna right now tell us who is gonna win the 151st running of the Kentucky Derby?
Man, this is going to be so good for me if I can play this back on a loop for people, if I actually end up nailing this. Again, I do add the disclaimer as well that I did have Mage to win the Kentucky Derby in 2023. That was almost entirely because my mother told me to bet on Mage, and I did it. Okay. I thought it'd be a good fun.
That is great, actually, Cam, because every Derby, I also get a text from my mom saying, please, can you please place a bet on this horse? And and I'm like, yeah, sure. She got it right, I believe. I think my mom also got Mage right.
There we go. Yeah.
So there's something to be said about the mothers of the world out there. Perhaps they're tuned in.
Yeah, shout out moms. Just, I mean, as a blanket statement, but also
Shout
I'm
out
actually
moms.
I'm going to be calling my mom later tonight. She's already requested that I send her the full 20 horse list, and she picks purely based on name and vibes. You know, I maybe she'll like ask me a couple clarifying questions, but so you know, if anyone's out there interested in what my mother is going to bet on the Derby, since she seems to be a bigger expert than me, at
Yes.
CZerman97 on X/Twitter, I'll give you the details. But for me personally, the horse that I've already staked a claim to in various group chats and told people I'm making the call, you know, 10 days in advance. This is the horse that's going to win the Derby. I'm going to be taking East Avenue, 20-1 on the morning line, post position number 12, trained by Brendan Walsh to be ridden by Manny Franco. I mentioned him very briefly earlier. He was second place in the Bluegrass Stakes, just got clipped at the wire by a nose by the Bluegrass winner at Burnham Square. One of the closest Bluegrass Stakes results in history at Keeneland. I really like the early speed that East Avenue showed. He went way too fast in the Bluegrass. I don't think anyone's going to be winning the Kentucky Derby with the kind of fractions that East Avenue put down. But I do like the speed he has. I do think a front runner probably has a good chance at winning the Derby this year. The way the post position draw shook out, a lot of the speed, there's not a ton of speed in this Derby, but the speed that does exist, a lot got drawn to the inside. Post positions 1 through 8, 1 through 7, for example. East Avenue is a bit more of a front runner. He's coming from post position 12. The only real speed horse I see coming from the outside is going to be Owen Almighty, who comes out of the 20 hole, the furthest outside hole. So I think East Avenue got a good draw. He's a very temperamental horse. And by that, I mean that he either seems to run really well or he completely no-shows. So it's a really kind of all or nothing effort with him. His 2 races before the Bluegrass were complete duds, absolute non-factors. Seems to also not really like getting shaken up or bumped to the back. He won't really kind of go or give you that second effort. So I am banking a bit on East Avenue getting a clean trip. I think the 12 hole will kind of help that. So hopefully there's not too much jostling that takes place. But yeah, I mean, I support the idea of journalism. Publisher is journalism adjacent as well. So from a pure naming convention standpoint, I stand in solidarity with my fellow writers and newspaper scribes out there. But, you know, if I'm going to the Kentucky Derby and I'm tossing $20 on something, it's got to be something that gets me, you know, the ability to retire a little bit earlier. And so I think East Avenue odds wise will do that more than journalism. But yeah, there's also a good chance he finishes like an 18th and I look pretty idiotic, which happens, you know, most of the time anyway.
Well, there you have it, though, folks. East Avenue going to win the Kentucky Derby. You heard it here first from Cameron Drummond, Lexington Herald leader. Hey, the great news is if you get it right, you'll have this for posterity for the rest of your life.
And if I get it wrong, then it's just like every other year.
If you get it wrong, we will bury it. No one will say it. I was like, no, like Cam did not say that. You have zero evidence of that. Well, it is. I think it's gonna shape up to be another great Derby. It looks like the weather is gonna be lovely. Looks like there might be a little bit of rain heading into the week in Louisville, but it looks like a day of we should be good. So I'm looking forward to another wonderful Kentucky Derby, which is chock full of what I believe are being sold at $22 for mint juleps. So that's its own thing. Just be prepared, people. Bring your money for the mint juleps and the bets if you place them. And I will see the 2 of you there as well in the flesh. So we will end it here. Thank you so much for watching. Go horses. Run that track, folks.